must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
Very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for finding time to be with us. This is Diaspora Dispatches. We get to bring you the latest news from the continent of Africa. I trust that you are well. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are tuned in today. And I do have so much in store for you this afternoon here in Nairobi, just a minute past 3 p.m. And we start our bulletin this afternoon from Ethiopia, and a report by the United Nations Human Rights Agency says at least 1,000 people, mostly ethnic Tigrayans, have been arrested since the government declared a state of emergency on the 2nd of November. Under the 6-month emergency, the authorities have sweeping powers to arrest people, detain suspects without trial, and conduct house searches without warrants. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said at least 1,000 individuals are believed to have been detained over the past week or so, with some reports putting the figure much higher. The statement said detention conditions are generally poor and many detainees are held in overcrowded police stations. 10 local United Nations staff members who were arrested on the 9th of November remain in detention. And then we head over to Burkina Faso, and hundreds of protesters held demonstrations in Burkina Faso's capital Ouagadougou on Tuesday, demanding the resignation of President Roch Kabore. The protesters accused the president of failing to rein in militants in the north and east who last weekend killed 28 soldiers and 4 civilians. The country is holding 3 days of national mourning that began on Tuesday over the latest attacks. A dozen civilians were killed at the beginning of the month in an attack by gunmen as they were going to a weekly market near the northern border with Mali. And then we head over to South Africa, where now the country has declared 4 days of national mourning following the death on Thursday of the last white president, F.W. de Klerk. The national mourning starts on Wednesday evening to Sunday evening, and the national flag will be flown at half-mast as a mark of respect, the presidency has said. De Klerk died at the age of 85 on Thursday last week after having been diagnosed with cancer earlier this year. He will be cremated on Sunday in a private funeral attended only by family members. And then we head over to Uganda, and the latest from that attack that happened yesterday. The so-called Islamic State group has said it was behind the blast in Uganda's capital in Kampala on Tuesday. Using the social messaging app Telegram, it claimed that there had been more than 30 deaths and injuries as a result of the explosions. Tuesday's explosions killed 3 civilians as well as 3 suicide bombers. According to official figures, over 30 people were injured in the blast. The police said they had pursued, shot and arrested a 4th suspected bomber. ISIS news agency Amag said Uganda was one of the countries participating in the war against Islamic State fighters in Central Africa. It's just justification for targeting the country. This is the 3rd time IS has claimed responsibility for attacks in Uganda since October this year. President Yoweri Museveni, in a series of tweets on Tuesday night, condemned the attacks and said they were being carried out by very confused grandchildren. And then we move over to Ethiopia. And the U.S. State Department has warned American citizens in Ethiopia that it will not be able to evacuate them if the security situations worsens suddenly. A senior U.S. official urged American citizens to leave Ethiopia immediately, saying that Washington had no plans to organize a mass evacuation as it did in Afghanistan. The U.S. and the African Union have been pressuring the Ethiopian government and rebels in the Tigray region to end their conflict, which has killed several thousand people and displaced 2 million since it started a year ago. American officials say the U.S. has held off approving sanctions against the warring parties because peace negotiations are still active. And then we go to Guinea-Bissau, and the country celebrated its 48th Independence Day, Armed Forces Day, led by President Umaro Sissoco Embalo in the presence of several political leaders from the region. The Guinean state has gone through periods of great political turbulence in a combination of the celebrations for the 56th anniversary of the creation of the armed forces and the festivities of the 48th of national independence were marked by a clear disagreement between President Embalo and Prime Minister Nuno Nabiam. The president also challenged the Guineans for a new national design that will bring the development that the country has been waiting for a long time. And then we go to Nigeria, and members of the House of Representatives have called on the Nigerian army to change strategy from being defensive to being offensive in the war against Boko Haram and Islamic State's West African province in the northeast, that is ISWAP. At the plenary on Tuesday, a member from Borno State, Haruna Mshedlia, had moved a motion of urgent public importance to decry the recent attacks by terrorists. According to the lawmaker, during such attacks, private and public properties are burnt down, stores with food items looted, and all people living in these areas are displaced into nearby bushes with all the risks and consequences that unfortunately follow. And then we go to Libya, and war-scarred Libya's eastern military chief Khalifa Haftar registered on Tuesday to run for the president in the December 24th election, also contested by a son of former dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Haftar's announcement came 2 days after Saif al-Islam Gaddafi announced his own bid a decade after his father's death in the 2011 NATO-backed rebellion. Both are deeply divisive figures. Gaddafi is wanted by the International Criminal Court (ICC) for alleged war crimes, while many in western Libya despise Haftar after his year-long assault in Tripoli, accusing the field marshal of seeking to establish a military dictatorship. Announcing his presidential run on Tuesday, Haftar vowed to defend Libya's unity, independence and sovereignty and call for reconciliation, peace and construction and also stability. News channel Libya Al-Hadath later broadcasted images apparently showing Haftar formally submitting his bid. His candidacy marks the latest stage in Haftar's dramatic trajectory from exile in the United States to becoming one of the most controversial figures in Libya's 10-year conflict. From 2014, he led a 3-year battle against jihadist groups in his eastern stronghold of Benghazi, establishing himself as the dominant power in the country's east. And in April 2019, backed by Russia, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, he launched an offensive on the capital Tripoli on the pretext of rooting out military groups. And then we go to Sudan, and the military leader in Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, says his new transitional government welcomed ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok should he change his mind to join. Al-Burhan told visiting U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Molly Fee that the new Sovereign Council he created is not opposed to the return of Dr. Hamdok to lead the civilian government. In a statement issued to the media after meeting with Ms. Fee on Tuesday, Burhan blamed foreign interference and certain political forces for distorting the reasons behind the coup last month. He argued that the military had adhered to the constitutional declaration, the guiding document for the transitional government, which he ousted last month in a coup. However, during a meeting in Khartoum, Burhan argued neither he nor the military will stick around beyond the formation of a proper civilian-led government after the transition. He also promised to have detained former members of the transitional cabinet as well as Prime Minister Hamdok released from his house arrest as soon as possible. It was Ms. Fee's first visit to Horn of Africa since she took office and had particularly visited Khartoum to push for restoration of Sudan's democratic transition. And then still staying with Sudan, and Sudan court on Tuesday declined to release key suspect involved in the 1989 coup that brought to power former President Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted in April 2019. The court, a special tribunal chaired by Supreme Court Judge Hussein al-Jak, sat through a session on Tuesday, hearing demands by the defense team to have the group accused of the June 1989 coup freed. The judge set November 30th this year as the date when the hearings will continue. The defense team has been exploring technicalities in the case to seek early freedom for the suspects. During the Tuesday hearing, hearing, they asked for ample time to interview the suspects, a move they argued will help provide sufficient information for defense. They also protested the continued delays in the case, arguing that it has become a victim of country's political chaos. The defense team told the court that suspects had been held for months without formal charge, something they said was outrightly unfair. And then we head over back to the other Guinea, and Guinea's junta leader Mamadi Doumbouya said his country could solve its own problems just days after the ECOWAS grouping of West African states hardened its stance against Conakry. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has suspended Guinea from the bloc and slapped sanctions against individual junta members and their families in retaliation for the September 5th coup that deposited President Alpha Condé. It has called for the unconditional release of Condé, who is now 83 years old, who has been under house arrest since his ouster. Worried about the impact on the area after neighboring Mali was also hit by two coups, the group has designated a special envoy for Guinea and called for elections to be held within 6 months. In a televised interview on Sunday evening, Doumbouya said Condé was being treated well, but his future would be decided by Guineans. The country's new strongman, who was sworn in interim president last month, said he was against the nomination of a special envoy as well as the 6-month time frame that ECOWAS gave the country. And then we end our news from Somalia. And the UN Security Council on Monday night endorsed an extension of sanctions on Somalia for another year in spite of calls by Mogadishu to take charge of its own security reform. Resolution 2607-2021 extends a sanction regime 751 on Somalia, which had been in place for nearly 30 years, have been amended by subsequent resolutions. The Monday resolution means that UN Security Council will extend further controls on Somalia's arms purchases to control smuggling of weapons, as well as regulating exceptions. 13 out of the 15 member council endorsed the resolution, with China and Russia abstaining from the vote. Ahead of the vote on sanctions, Somalia had been calling for an end to arms purchases as one way of allowing its military to recoup. Somalia has also posed plans to extend the stay of the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, or turn it into a hybrid mission that will still include having troops and technical experts in the country. Extending sanctions and changing the nature of AMISOM are among the key decisions the Council is set to make before the end of the year. And I think at this point, I'm going to take you straight to another live coverage. I told you, I don't know if I mentioned it on the show, but we do have the United States Secretary of State in the country, Anthony Blinken, and he's giving a live interview. So I'll just take us there to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Have a very good afternoon to you.
The expansion of fighting throughout the country and what we see as a growing risk to the unity and to the integrity of the Ethiopian state. For that reason, it's my responsibility, our responsibility, to first and foremost ensure the safety and security of American citizens, of embassy personnel, and to be cautious and to make sure that we are doing that. We have urged Americans who are in Ethiopia to take advantage of the opportunity to leave. And my strong hope and conviction is we will help move things back to a place where it will be very safe for them to return and for Ethiopia to continue to move forward. But it is the responsible, prudent, and necessary thing to do to make sure that we are looking out for our citizens and also looking out for our embassy. We instructed the embassy to reduce its staffing to essential personnel some days ago. Now, I strongly believe that there is an opportunity, and more than an opportunity, an absolute necessity for all of the parties to stop, to talk, to pull back, to get humanitarian assistance to flow, and ultimately to be at a table together and negotiate through the various differences that that have emerged over the past year. I spoke with Ethiopian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Makonnen a few days ago. I shared our deep concern over the ongoing conflict, emphasizing the urgency of taking concrete steps for peace on the part of everyone involved. I reiterate our call for all parties to urgently and seriously engage in negotiations on a cessation of hostilities without preconditions. And I underscored the need for immediate, unhindered humanitarian access to northern Ethiopia and in support of all Ethiopian communities in need, because what we've seen is the way the conflict has progressed, more and more parts of the country have become involved and or are in jeopardy with their citizens bearing the consequences. And whether that's in Tigray over the last year, more recently in Amara, and moving further south toward Addis, the people who suffer are the people, and we have to make sure that they are getting the assistance they need, and that the fighting ceases and the talking starts. In addition to that, the conflict in Ethiopia is a threat to peace and security in the Horn of Africa, and that is of deep concern to us too, and it's of deep concern to our partners, including here in Kenya. So we're looking for all sides, as I said, to step back. The TPLF and the OLA should halt their advance on Addis. We'd like to see the parties come together at the table to put in place a cessation of hostilities. We need to see humanitarian assistance flow freely now. We need to see people detained released, and we need to see everyone engaging in an effort to resolve the differences that exist peacefully and constitutionally. Let me just add that we are working with a whole host of partners to advance these efforts, but most important, the representative of the African Union, former Nigerian President Obasanjo, who's leading the mediation efforts. We're in strong support of what he's doing, and we're also very appreciative of the work that other partners, starting with President Kenyatta, have done to try to support President Obasanjo's efforts, the AU's efforts to move this forward. Bottom line is that there is no military solution to this conflict. Every party has to recognize that and act accordingly. With regard to atrocities, we have deep concern about that, as we have over the past many months, something that we are looking at very closely, very carefully, and making determinations as we go along. Thank you.
Our first question will go to John Hudson of the Washington Post.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. A few questions on Ethiopia. Is Prime Minister Abiy the legitimate leader of Ethiopia? And if so, how do you view the TPLF, which seeks Abiy's overthrow? I know you just mentioned that you're making considerations, but can you just give us the latest on whether you view what happened in Tigray as a genocide, and if so, why stay quiet? And Cabinet Secretary, is the Kenyan government hopeful for a ceasefire after President Kenyatta's visit to Addis this weekend?
Thanks, John. I'm happy to start. The second part of your question first, with regard to, as I said, to the atrocities and how we would categorize them. We're focused on the facts, and we're focused on the law, and we will make a determination. I will make a determination once we get all the analysis that goes into looking at the facts and looking at the law. Regardless of that, the fact is that we have seen, we continue to see atrocities being committed, people suffering, and regardless of what we call it, it needs to stop, and there needs to be accountability. and we're determined that there will be. I also said that as this moves forward, it is very important that the differences, the conflicts be resolved by people sitting down at the table, talking, discussing, negotiating. And that needs to be done, in my judgment, pursuant to the constitutional order, including with the duly elected leaders of the country, Prime Minister Abiy, but at the table with all who have grievances and concerns that, unfortunately, everyone, and tragically, everyone has chosen to express through military means as opposed to using the political process. It's vitally important that everyone come back to the political process for resolving differences that exist and moving Ethiopia forward.
Thank you very much for your question, and I think it was as to whether or not we are hopeful for a ceasefire after President Kenyatta's visit to Ethiopia recently. President Kenyatta deals with this issue as a friend and as a neighbor of Ethiopia. And friends and neighbors believe in the potential of their neighbor. We believe in the potential of Ethiopia to find a resolution to this crisis. We believe that a ceasefire is possible. We believe that the other conditions regarding humanitarian access are possible. We must believe in the fortitude and the wisdom of the Ethiopian people, because in the end, these solutions will come from them. What we must do as neighbors is to support, is to counsel, is to hold hands, is to point in the right direction to ensure that this crisis, when it ends, and we believe it will end, will leave Ethiopia a stronger nation, will leave Ethiopia a stronger partner, and a country that is able once again to guarantee the peace in our region. Let us not give up hope in the people of Ethiopia. We must remain steadfast in being positive and being engaged in this crisis. I thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Agri Mtambo for Nation Media Group. My first question goes to both secretaries. I just wanted to know how you intend to elevate the issues of climate change and environmental conservation within your strategic partnerships. And then I wanted to know specifically for you, Secretary of State, what role do you think Kenya should play in the Ethiopian crisis? Thank you.
Rachel, would you like to start?
The first question was how do we propose to integrate climate change into our foreign policy?
Strategic partnership with the U.S.
Into our strategic partnership with the U.S. Well, I think the U.S. and Kenya believe in the same values, in this idea that we all have to engage as a collective to bring down emissions and to facilitate adaptation. We have already worked together at COP26 on these issues. We have worked together on conferences that have been called by President Biden on this, and we will continue to partner in looking at investments in the area of green industries, in the area of energy. We want to work together to facilitate adaptation measures that will help build resilience in our communities. we want to ensure that working with the United States, we are able to unlock the climate financing gap and to create new products that will enable countries like us, who are in the third world, who are least responsible for global warming, shore up our resilience and our ability to transform our own economies from the green transition. We must work together on the issue of climate change and its connection with security, its connection with agriculture, its connection with innovation, and its connection with building a body politic of Kenyans and Americans who are interested in preserving our planet. In our discussions this afternoon, we were able to identify just a few of the policy possibilities that are available to us. We must, however, be a little bit more strategic and ensure that we identify those programs, those initiatives that will have the biggest impact, not only for our relationship, but for our respective people and for this planet that we love. I thank you.
Well, I couldn't say it any better. Just to quickly add, as I said earlier, we are deeply appreciative of Kenya's leadership when it comes to climate. And what Kenya has done, particularly in leading on renewables, is important not just for Kenya and for Kenyans. It is setting a powerful example for the world, and something that we point to regularly as we're engaging other countries on climate change. It is, to your point, though, very much, and as Secretary said, very much a part of our partnership, and in these ways. First, and more broadly, we recognize that as a prosperous country that also has contributed over the years to much of the problem, that we have, with other countries similarly situated, a special obligation to help other countries build resilience and adapt. President Biden this spring doubled the commitment that we're making to resilience and adaptation for countries that need assistance, and then he doubled that again at the UN General Assembly. And we're working with Congress to make sure that those funds are available. Coming out of COP26, we also helped lead the way to working to ensure that countries move even further when it comes to supporting adaptation and resilience for countries that need assistance, and we're going to be working on that. In the context of our own partnership, besides working together in these important international meetings and moments, we're also working directly together in ways that bring together different goals that we have, because they're complementary. And so, for example, as we're working to build back better from COVID and advance inclusive growth that benefits our people, one way to do that is to invest in green technology and in sustainable infrastructure. And that also meets the needs that we have for advancing the fight against climate change. So, as Cabinet Secretary said, we're very focused on initiatives between the United States and Kenya where we can engage in those kind of projects together, where we can make those kinds of investments. And that's something that we have a mandate now to look at very carefully. We have a number of different tools in the United States to help advance those kind of investments, including the Development Finance Corporation and others. We're trying to bring to bear all of these tools on working with partners, starting with close partners like Kenya, on making these kinds of investments going forward. They'll have economic benefits, good jobs, good wages, and they'll have clear climate benefits. And we'll continue together as we're working bilaterally to also coordinate our efforts when it comes to helping urging other countries to continue to raise their ambitions and to meet the goal that we share, which is making sure that temperatures don't rise more than 1.5 degrees Celsius because if we're not able to achieve that goal, then the world has a very, very big problem.
Final question will go to Michael Crowley, The New York Times.
Hello, thank you both. Secretary Blinken, in Sudan, despite the diplomacy you mentioned at the top of your remarks to reinstate Prime Minister Hamdok, the country's army chief last week appointed himself the head of a new ruling council. Does the U.S. accept the authority of that council? And if not, what is your next move for pressuring the military to back down or at least to stop shooting protesters? For both of you, a question on the bombings in Kampala yesterday. Cabinet Secretary, are you worried that Islamic extremist groups in the region may be growing stronger? And do you believe current U.S. counterterrorism efforts are adequate? And Secretary Blinken, could you update us on the status of the administration's Somalia policy review? Following President Trump's withdrawal of U.S. counterterrorism troops there, will U.S. troops be returning to the country? Thank you both.
Michael, thank you very much. On Sudan, the most important thing now is for the civilian-led transition to resume. And that means that this civilian-led transition, which was derailed by the military takeover a few weeks ago, needs to be put back on its tracks. And that, among other things, involves restoring Prime Minister Hamdok to his position as Prime Minister, so that this transition, led by civilians in cooperation with the military, can continue, and also can continue to receive the strong international support, including from the United States and international financial institutions. People of Sudan have repeatedly made clear their aspirations for democracy, their aspirations for this transition to continue. So this is what they want. This is what the international community supports. We're working with partners in the international community to urge the Sudanese military to release all of those who've been detained in recent weeks in connection with the takeover, and for the return of the civilian-led transitional government as stated in the Constitutional Declaration. We're also very much engaged with all the parties to try to put that train back on its tracks. Our Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Malifi, was just in Khartoum a couple of days ago. She met with Prime Minister Hamdok, among others. We'll continue to remain deeply engaged in support of the aspirations of the Sudanese people. And I'll say again about Prime Minister Hamdok, he is a source of legitimacy, and it's vital that the transition regain the legitimacy that it had before the civilian-led effort was derailed. But if the military puts this train back on its tracks and does what's necessary, I think the support that has been very strong from the international community can resume. That support has largely been suspended, and Sudan needs it. People of Sudan need it. Those responsible for Sudan need it. And so I think the international community not only has a strong voice, but significant leverage in, again, seeing a return to the civilian-led transition. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Would you remind me what it was?
What do you think the role of Kenya in this Ethiopia crisis? What is the U.S. view of Kenya's?
I see. I'm sorry. I apologize for missing that. I think Cabinet Secretary said it very, very well. I'll just add that we very much appreciate the efforts that the President Kenyatta has made personally to engage and to support the efforts that are being led by the AU's mediator, former President Obasanjo. We very much applaud President Kenyatta's engagement on this. And I'm sorry, over to you.
Thank you. The question was about the bombings in Kampala. First, let me convey our deepest condolences to all those who perished in that attack, and wish quick recovery to those who were injured. But even as we condemn the attack in Kampala, we must remember that a few days before there was an attack in the United Kingdom of a similar kind. What it tells us is that terrorism is a problem for all of us, and the requirement is one of constant vigilance by all. It is necessary that we continue to collaborate and share intelligence, share best practices, so that as a world we are able to tackle this problem together. We must also strengthen our communities to be able to detect terrorists and to report them. We mustn't sit on our laurels, because if we do, then we give terrorists space to advance their evil agenda. What we must do is to work with partners, and I'm glad that we have been working with the United States and other partners on improving our counterterrorism structures, improving our counterterrorism skills, improving our counter-violent extremism programs. That's what we must do, and we must look at this threat not only insofar as it affects African countries, but in the way in which it is networked and affects the entire globe. I thank you.
And Michael, with regard to the question of U.S. forces in Somalia, to your point, the Defense Department, in the first instance, the administration, more broadly, are engaged in a global posture review. That's not yet complete, so I'm not going to get ahead of it, but that's in train. Thanks.
Well, I thank you all for your kind attention, and we now bring this press conference to an end. Thank you all very much, and thank you, my brother.
Thank you.